Today, we're going to do something really practical. We're going to build a toolkit for our minds. We'll dive into what it really means to feel low, and more importantly, we're going to uncover some powerful, evidence-based strategies that you can actually use to manage your mood and build up your resilience. So, let's get right into it. So when you hear the word depression, what's the first image that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's a pretty specific picture of sadness and maybe pulling away from the world. But what if that's not the whole story? What if one of the most common forms of depression looks, well, surprisingly different? All right, in this first section, we're going to totally challenge that one-size-fits-all idea of depression. We're going to explore a type of depression that, believe it or not, is incredibly common, but its symptoms might be the exact opposite of what you'd expect. Okay, this is so fascinating. We tend to think of depression as this melancholic state, right? Where nothing can cheer you up, you don't want to eat, you can't sleep. But then there's this other form called atypical depression, where good news can actually give you a temporary lift. And instead of not eating, you might eat more. Instead of insomnia, you might be sleeping way too much. It's a completely different side of the same coin. Now here's the crucial point. The word atypical here does not mean rare, not at all. It just means its symptoms are different from that classic type we just talked about. In fact, according to WebMD, it's super common and it often starts showing up during the teenage years. That's why understanding these different phases of depression is just so important. So no matter what the specific symptoms are, whether you're sleeping too much or too little, there's often an underlying pattern that keeps us stuck. It's this self-reinforcing loop, a vicious cycle. This image just captures it perfectly, doesn't it? Depression isn't just one thing. It's this whole cloud of connected symptoms. You've got the emotional stuff, like sadness and guilt, but then you have the very real physical things, like feeling tired all the time or getting headaches, and they all feed into each other, creating this really powerful, overwhelming feeling. And the NHS actually calls this exact thing the vicious cycle. It's this core idea that our physical feelings, our thoughts, and our actions, they aren't separate problems. They're all locked together in this feedback loop, where each one makes the others worse. So, how does the cycle actually work? Well, it can start with just one thought, something like, what's the point? That thought then triggers feelings of sadness, of exhaustion, and because you feel that way, you might cancel your plans or just stay in bed. And then that very act of withdrawing reinforces the original thought that, there is no point. See how that works? The cycle just gets tighter and stronger. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors are all fueling each other, where do you even start to break it? Well, the good news is there are proven ways to jump in and disrupt that loop. Okay, so where do we start breaking this cycle? Let's start with our thoughts. This brings us to a really powerful set of tools called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Now, I know it sounds a little clinical, but it's really just about learning some practical skills to change the way we think, which in turn changes how we feel and what we do. At its heart, CBT is all about recognizing that our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions are all connected. So if we can learn to change our thinking patterns, that's the cognitive part, and our actions, that's the behavioral part, we can have a direct impact on how we feel. It's all about finding a place to intervene in that vicious cycle we've been talking about. This right here, this is the foundational idea of CBT, and it's a game changer. It's not necessarily the event itself that makes us feel a certain way, it's our view of that event. I mean, two people can go through the exact same thing and have totally different emotional reactions, all because of the story they tell themselves about what happened. And that is where our power to change things really lies. So how do you actually do this? The NHS suggests this really simple 3-step process. First, you catch the negative thought as it happens. You know, that automatic thought like, I'm a complete failure. Then you challenge it. You ask yourself, wait a minute, is that really true? Am I a complete failure? What about all the times I've done well? And finally, you change it to something more balanced and realistic, like, okay, I made a mistake, but I can definitely learn from it. It's a skill, and like any skill, you get better with practice. So, we've talked about rewiring our thoughts. Now, let's talk about fueling our bodies. We're shifting from the cognitive side of things to the behavioral, and we're going to focus on one of the most powerful mood shifters out there, exercise. I mean, we're all told that exercise is good for us, but what does the actual science say? When you measure it with the same tough standards you'd use for other medical treatments, just how effective is it, really? Well, this data comes from what's called a meta-analysis, which is basically a study of studies. It's super powerful, and what it found is pretty incredible. Across 25 separate trials, Exercise had a large and significant effect on depression. And we're not talking a small little bump here. This was a major improvement. And it held true even for people diagnosed with major depressive disorder. To put a number on it, researchers calculated the effect size at 1.11. Now, you don't need to be a statistician to understand this. It just means that the impact of exercise on depression is not just noticeable, it's substantial. It's a big, big deal. In fact, the data is so compelling, so strong, that the study's authors flat out say that exercise isn't just a healthy habit, it should be considered an evidence-based treatment for depression. It deserves to be in the same conversation as therapy and medication as a first-line tool for managing your mood. Okay, so we've looked at the different ways depression can show up, that vicious cycle that can keep us feeling trapped, and two really powerful tools to break free, changing our thoughts and moving our bodies. Now let's bring it all together into our practical toolkit. So here are the essentials for your mental health toolkit. First, understand your personal cycle. Get curious about how your thoughts, feelings, and actions connect. Second, practice challenging those unhelpful thoughts. Third, and this is a big one, activate your behavior. The motto here is follow the plan, not the mood. Don't wait until you feel like it. Schedule it and do it. Fourth, move your body. And finally, support the whole system with good sleep, nutrition, and connection with other people. And that's really the main takeaway here. There's no single magic cure for a low mood. It's all about building a personalized toolkit of different strategies that you can pull from when you need them. It's about empowering yourself with skills to handle whatever life throws your way. So that leaves us with one last question. Looking at all these tools, you don't have to master them all at once, not even close. Just ask yourself, what's the first, smallest, most manageable step you can take today? Maybe it's a 10-minute walk. Maybe it's just catching one negative thought. That one small step, that's where all the change begins.